which means it has value and it produces value, and it is a political possibility, a political resource. Okay, maybe I should stop there. I'll just stop there. Take any questions.
Right, guys, how are our noses? Do we have any questions? If your noses are already fine, do you have any questions? Do you have any questions?
Shall I ask a question? Maybe the question is, how do you read literature? You know, what does one read literature for? How does one read it? Right? Anybody have any idea? As I said, it used to be when you would read third world literature, so what you were reading for was their experience, was our experiences, and what we could uphold to make powerful political subjects, right? But what I am suggesting that we also need to look at, and the way that we should read literature, is not only the intended subject, the constructed the politics, what it is that what we want, but what happens in either the poem or the story that shows us some other hidden feelings, subjectivities, and resources that we do not take seriously. Right? Because they either do not accord with our ideas of what is valuable in the literary sense, or they're not valuable in a political sense. So that is what I am advocating we read. There are many ways to read these stories and many ways to read this poem. Right? But usually, the way that they are read from a third worldist perspective is to see whether they are inherently empowering or not. Right? But what I want to show you, you can also read for, is what kinds of modes of experience, subjectivities, feelings are represented there, which in the story seem to be either trivial or tangential to the main plot, to the main theme of the story, but are actually necessary for that theme or political construction to happen. And that gives us a clue to what we see what we don't also recognize in society. So obviously, what I'm saying is that when you read literature, you also have to be attentive to the context in which it was written, right? The place and the conditions and the social relations. So you cannot read literature only by relying on your formalist analysis. Right? You have to mobilize many things. As you see in the readings that I did, I had to know about economics. I had to know about the labor process. Right? You have to know about what happened in the 80s, 90s, why it is that this becomes important to representations in feminist literature. Right? So you have to be interdisciplinary in your approach to literature. You cannot remain literary scholars without a broader understanding of the social relations that become reflected in the work. Yes?
Hi, I'm Daryl Delgado from the English department. I'm, of course, very, very much interested in the idea that you just shared with us, the idea of suffering and danas, kahirapan, as a kind of a meaning production in itself. And not only that, but as something that might be positive, as you said earlier, that we can get probably get political meanings out of these things. And you also said that it is this kind of narrative upon which the Filipino community, which is outside, is built on. I was wondering if you were talking about subjectivity in the sense that it is a concept of self that is fashioned out of a personal experience, or if it is something that is shaped by an other, a stranger looking at the subject. Because I was thinking, on the one hand, this kind of this subjectivity might be construed as that which is precisely that, shaped by the gaze of an other, in a sense that the subject is merely playing out the other's fantasy about herself. But on the other hand, and perhaps I'll find this in your book, is it possible that this subjectivity is important precisely because it is coming from the inside, from the experience? I just wanted to be clarified on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. You know, in the day when our subjectivity is always shaped in relationship to inside and outside. Right? There's no such thing as purely our own, as if we were isolated, because the conditions in which we're in is the conditions under which we create our subjectivity. So on the one hand, yes, it is partly produced because of our relationship to the others who see themselves as either our masters or our employers, or right. On the other hand, there is a long tradition in Philippine literature and in Philippine history of suffering as a political means, right? You have, and Mabanglo, for example, who I write about, was very well versed in the traditions of the pasyon, the corrido, and the awit. So she knew all of these poetic forms. So she was harnessing something that we also is a local technology of selfhood, right? A local technology of in relationship, but still in relationship to the colonizer. So I guess the answer is not that it's either just our own or shaped in relationship to the others, but it is in the relationship between the two. Right?
Thank you.
I'm interested with your reading of the Passion as something that translates to Christ time. So my question actually is, what is this notion of time that you're using? The notion of time, is it parang a chronological event? So if we are going to read diasporas, for example, globalization, can we say these as chronological events, or are there also other ways of reading that time that you're talking about, that Christ time?
Also an excellent question, because the question of time is actually very important to my book. This Christ time is not chronological time. It is a political time. And just like the times of waste that I mentioned, it is a time, it is a time for Christ time. Christ time is a time of suffering, which means that it's not about you becoming Christ-like. It is about people sharing in Christ's time, meaning participating and sharing in the experience of suffering, in their capacity to suffer not only what they suffer, but to suffer other people's suffering. It is the basis of political solidarity, to be able to suffer for another, to suffer for yourself, to suffer, what someone else is suffering. And there are traditions in other colonial labor. I mentioned in the book, I mentioned the Caribbean, where they talk about, where Edward Gisson, for example, talks about this, or slave labor and so forth. So Christ's time here is not a chronological time. It is a kind of moment, right? That's why I stress danas, experience, time, right? It is what you go through, and then that becomes the basis of a political movement or feelings across. Does that make sense? There are other kinds of time here in this book. There's the times of waste. There's times of sorrow in the revolutionary movement. Because I also analyzed, I have 3 chapters on the revolutionary movement in the literature about the way that sorrow is mobilized in the literature, right? About the tradition of participating in that time, right? I don't know if there's more to say, obviously. But the thing is, in Christ's time, you're calling for a different framework from the time of capitalism. Because right now, we all are led to believe we live in one time, that we live in the same time, that we live under the time of capitalist progress, that we're either always behind, catching up, right? Or, you know, we missed out. That's because we try to accord with a dominant kind of time. Christ's time is a counter-hegemonic time. It is not the time of the heroism of capitalism. It's not the time of profit. It is not the time